Thanks for joining DirectConnect. I got Steve Parker with me today. We're going to talk more about SIP 4 and SIP 11 and new standards and all the fun that comes with that. But with that, how you doing, Steve?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. Before we jumped on, you issued a statement. You said words have meaning. And I've heard that phrase many times. Many people probably have. But do you know what would happen if words did not have meaning?
I have a teenager, so I feel like I do.
They would be meaningless.
Last episode, you and Leonard went through a lot of the changes there and some of the potential pitfalls. And we've seen since then in a few industry threads that people are already tripping, including auditors potentially.
Quite possibly, and I think it underscores, the advice that we often give to people to stay connected, and obviously paying attention to Archer and some of the stuff we put out is useful as well. But being connected to your peers in industry, because when they experience something, oftentimes they're going to share within various industry forums, some of which are more open and public, and sometimes it's just a direct phone call to a couple of close friends. But it helps to keep the pulse of what's going on. Words do have meaning, obviously, and if they didn't, they would be meaningless. But words carry different weight. So a standard has certain legal weight, particularly if something were to go to the court of law. Other comments and statements made by auditors, individuals within a region, written guidance documents, written presentations, they all carry different weights. And so you have to factor a lot of all in and kind of decide what's the best approach given your risk tolerance and where you're situated in the industry. So specifically, there's been some concerns coming up regarding cloud. It's obviously been an issue for quite some time. The changes made to SIP 4 and SIP 11 were really designed to better support the use of cloud. And there's been some chatter from a variety of sources indicating that at least one region perhaps is suggesting that the approach people think is going to work might not work. So that's obviously a bit concerning.
I believe what was put forward that I saw was the potential for the those provisioning access to provision unauthorized access made it a violation. Is that short version of that? I don't know how we got past the physical and cyber access before, because you have the same issue there.
Yeah, well, whether it's cloud or whether it's an internal company system, you have the same issue, right? You have individuals with administrative access that either directly have access to the system and the data, or indirectly they could provision access for themselves through their administrative credentials. I can think of one example in the record that's somewhat related to that concept. In the NERC region a number of years ago, I think you and I had talked about this, they issued a penalty or found noncompliance with an entity because their badging system administrators had knowledge of the PINs that they were establishing for individuals, and therefore that undermined the two-factor authentication, the use of the PINs. Now, obviously, the administrators could give themselves whatever access they wanted, so there wasn't really any additional risk per se, but they found that as a violation. Along the same lines, there's suggestions that the ability for an administrator to grant themselves access to BCSI, for example, might actually be considered provisioned access, which I personally would disagree with. I don't think you have provisioned access until you have actually provisioned that. The fact that they have the ability to do that doesn't matter because they haven't done it. So until it's actually provisioned, I don't think it's provisioned access. But, it's a concern. It's something that's come up and it's being talked about pretty actively right now.
Yeah, I think that just reminds me of some of the earlier days when we were first looking at version 5. I know when I was still at WEC and looking at where are the trip hazards on this one, where are the issues. I know one of the ones that we dealt with, that Darren Nielsen and I actually, we spent a lot of time going round and round. How do we actually audit this? The two controls on SIP 6R 1.3. What does that mean? Because when it was put together, I think the drafting team had a clear idea. What they wrote down, words have meaning, and the words they wrote were really challenging to implement. So I think this isn't new. It's a new chapter of the same story. It's a new setting for a Hallmark movie. But I think that's one of the issues we run into with our standards.
It's a case of the drafting teams perhaps being a little too cute, where they have something they want to say, and rather than just saying it, they abstract it out a little bit. Now, in fairness, we don't want our standards to be so overly prescriptive and so overly narrow that they're not useful more broadly. So, I can see why they wouldn't come in and say, hey, in this particular cloud scenario, you do this particular technical control. That would not be a good thing. But they didn't mention cloud at all. And I think, as we pointed out in our previous DirectConnect, the provisioned access not being defined, despite the fact that there is some pretty decent guidance on it, guidance is just guidance. Even endorsed guidance, which is generally very reliable, is not necessarily perfect. So you get these situations where, what does it mean to be provisioned, under what circumstances? And there's always opportunities for auditors to take different approaches and have different opinions. So we as expected, we need to watch for that as these new versions are rolled out, as they're implemented, and as audits begin. We need to track the approaches that are taken very, very closely. And frankly, don't be afraid to push back a little bit. My personal opinion is the industry has been very reluctant to push back on auditors when they are not, maybe their opinions seem inappropriate. We can debate about what that is and what that isn't, but utilities should not be afraid to push back if they think they're being subjected to improper, inappropriate, different opinions on what the standards say. We have appeals processes for a reason. Don't be afraid to take advantage of those when needed.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that it's been good for me personally, because I've gotten a chance to really go through ins and outs on CIP 14, which I think is probably the most broadly written standard we've got right now. I jokingly say that R4 should just say go do a vulnerability assessment, and R5 should say go do security. But what we've seen by being connected and in some of these forums is people are starting to realize that the audit approach doesn't necessarily match the words on paper. It's not out of bounds, but when you make a very broad standard, that flexibility cuts both ways. And that's where you really have to, like you said, stay in touch with the industry, whether it's through the various forums or the phone a friend. I was actually kind of shocked to be at a client late last year that was floored at some of the audit approaches that we were explaining we were seeing on CIP 14 for multiple regions. It never crossed their mind that might be an issue. And I just kind of looked at that and, where have you been hiding? But it's important, and it's whether it's right or wrong, until it's challenged, then it is the standard. Kind of to your point. So,
and of course, the language on provisioned access, that was primarily written to support encryption. The concept of using encryption to protect data, and then the provisioned access would be having the ability to decrypt the data. Right? That was a lot of the discussion. That didn't get put into the standards. It got put into technical rationale documents and guidance and things of that nature. But it makes it it's a little bit weaker when it's not directly in the standard.
Yeah, I know that's one of the things that I've run across that one a number of times on other standards where, this is an industry approved guidance document. There's different levels on that. I'd say at the lowest level is the industry approved, and there's the NERC accepted. I think that's what the term they use is accepted, not approved.
ERO endorsed.
ERO endorsed, there we go. And then the guidelines and technical basis that are in the standard, which has gone, I feel like that one's kind of gone both directions, whether it's been accepted or not, then the actual language of the standard. But at the end of the day, the language of the standard is the only thing that's binding. So I think that's one of those pieces where it's important to understand that you can make that argument, but it's not completely risk-free.
And there's always the possibility of a interpretation request, which those have been fairly rare. I'm a big advocate of that process. Challenge now, NERC and the drafting teams, it's very busy, very, very busy right now with standards development activities. And so even if a interpretation request was accepted, it's going to be a while. It's probably not going to be prioritized. It's going to be 2-3 years perhaps before that would get put through. So it's just one of those challenging situations we have to deal with. Entities have to deal with, and we're here, we're watching it, we're monitoring it. We have opinions and ideas, and we can certainly help if requested to help work through some of those issues and help guide decisions.
One of the other things, it's an opportunity for education as well, not just for the registered entities, but also for the ERO and the regions. That's one of the things that, particularly when we did the SIP version 5 and the low impact, we did some case studies on those, and I think there was the pilot program. That was one of the things I did appreciate at that point, still being at WEC, was that we were candid and said, hey, we want to figure this out too. Let's figure it out together. I feel like that's kind of slipped a little bit, but there's still the opportunity for that. When you reach out either directly, or if you're not comfortable reaching out directly to your region, that's one of the things that we can do to help obfuscate. Like, hey, I've got a client, or I know somebody, I have a friend, I'm asking for a friend. What do you think about this? Or this is the approach we're looking at. What are the challenges with it? That's not always, you come to them with a request, but it's not necessarily always a request. A lot of times there's an opportunity to educate. Because at the end of the day, the auditors don't know the challenges that every utility faces inside and out, even if it's one they actually worked at, because things have changed. The environment's changed, the landscape's changed. So, and most of the auditors, I think, at the regions at this point are pretty open to that when it's not a challenge during the audit. I'd say that's probably the time when it's not the best one. But when you're looking at implementing a change, I still recommend reaching out to your auditors or your enforcement team at your region and just get their thoughts. Any other thoughts or concerns so far on the SIP 4, SIP 11 cloud vague standards? Where else could we go?
I don't know. Fasten your seatbelts. I think the devil's in the details sometimes, and you mentioned educating auditors and such. And in fairness to auditors, it's very difficult to keep up on all the different technologies and approaches. So educating them on specifically how some of this stuff works and how it relates to the standards, and maybe if industry can take a proactive approach, maybe they can head some of this stuff off before it becomes a real issue and auditors become entrenched in their positions.
Auditors would never do that, would they?
No, not at all. Nope.
Well, thanks for joining. It's a short DirectConnect, short and sweet, but I think there's a lot of lessons learned already a month and 5 days into these standards being applicable. More to come. So,
all right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, and take care.
Your support drives us forward. Don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications, ensuring you never miss out on valuable insights. When it comes to safeguarding your business, Archer is your trusted partner. Explore our robust solutions at archerint.com. Get in touch with an email or phone call and fortify your company's defenses. We value your input. Share your thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to cover, and tune in every other Wednesday for a brand new episode of Direct Connect.